This video has been a long time coming. The Minecraft video took a majority of 2021 to make, but this video has been in the works since 2020. It has come time for me to talk about a very important video game franchise. I'm not too sure if this was the first video game I played, but it was definitely one of the first few I can remember, and at minimum, I can thank for getting me into PC games. If it wasn't for me somehow playing this game when I was 3 years old, and if it wasn't for me managing to discover it again when I was 7 years old, I don't know if I would be as into old PC games as I am. Eventually, I would have played Minecraft. Without playing this series, I'm pretty sure I still would have found the game everyone in my generation played. However, one of the attitudes I hold with PC gaming is entirely the result of this franchise. So let me now set the stage for this hour-long special. SimCity 3000 Unlimited was the first SimCity game I played and was the first PC game I played, which I first did on a Windows 98 PC. SimCity 4 Deluxe is the first game I got on my first computer and is the first game I ever modded, along with probably my second or third most played game of all time, only truly surpassed by Minecraft. SimCity, SimCity 2000, SimCity 3000, and SimCity 4 are 4 games I consider to make up the SimCity series of games. Yeah, I'm not too sure where to draw the line between franchise and series, as arguably I could label most of Maxis' games in the 90s as the Sim franchise. Technically, The Sims falls under this, yet it feels to me the two biggest things to come from the Sim line of games was SimCity and The Sims. Spoiler alert, I do have a video planned in the future about The Sims. I have about equal nostalgia with The Sims as a series as I do SimCity as a series, but for this video, I will only be focusing on SimCity. Let me say one last thing before we start. This video is going to be weird. Unlike my video on Minecraft, I can't easily talk about SimCity in a set number of years. Time is really fucking weird, because last time I was really into SimCity was almost a decade ago. At one point, I almost exclusively played The Sims and SimCity, and that feels like it was just last year. So, with that said, let's start at the very beginning. To understand SimCity's design, we must begin with Will Wright. The man behind SimCity, SimAnt, SimEarth, and eventually The Sims began making games very early on in the PC boom of the 70s and 80s.
And I started thinking, well, maybe I should try making a game. At least they'd be tax deductible then, all the stuff I buy from my computer. And so it was almost more of a whim that I'm just going to try programming a game now that I've learned, to program and that I enjoy games. I went out and bought, a shiny new Commodore 64. I paid full retail price of $600 for it. So what I did is I had actually been programming on my Apple II for quite a while, and there were some really good tools on the Apple II. I had a bright idea, which is I'm going to do all my programming on the Apple II, and then I'm going to dump it into the Commodore. So I actually wrote, a little machine language routine on each end, built a hardware interface between the two, so I could do all of my programming on the Apple II. But still, I was kind of left with, what kind of game do I want to make here? And ever since I was a little kid, I loved helicopters, It
is clear as day just how different games looked on the Commodore 64 in comparison to nowadays, but to get to The Sims, you must first get to SimCity. And to get to SimCity, you must first look at Raid on Bungeling Bay. What does a military-esque shooter where you fly a helicopter around the screen have to do with city building? Nothing. At least with the main gameplay loop in Bungeling Bay. If you look in the background, you'll see military bases with roads, buildings, and generally just a bunch of infrastructure that supports the military-industrial complex of the Bungeling Empire. It was these systems and the level editor Will Wright made to make this game that formed the basis of SimCity.
Wedit was actually a program that allowed me to now scroll around this large world and place these custom characters in little patterns, just kind of dropping down tiles. And this is basically how I built the world for Raid on Bungeling Bay. And in fact, later, after I finished Raid on Bungeling Bay, it was Wedit that kind of eventually evolved into SimCity. I was having so much fun kind of like building these little worlds in Wedit that I started adding more and more features to it. But I began becoming interested in adding more dynamics to the world. I wanted to see traffic moving on the roads and things happening. And so that was the first time I actually started reading books on, cities and urban planning and urban dynamics, and came across the work of Jay Forrester, who wrote a seminal work way back called Urban Dynamics. Because I had that kind of resource, this depth of a whole field of topic to research, I got more interested in this little program. Hey, I wonder if I can do a traffic model the way they do traffic models. I wonder if I can do land value according to this theory.
You see, why simply destroy these military bases and cities when you could perhaps design your own cities? Enter Micropolis, the original working title for this game, a game where you design cities. Yeah, game. That's the biggest problem SimCity had from the start, and in fact, such a question still remains to this day. How does urban planning make for a fun game? In Raid on Bungeling Bay, you had the objective of destroying the military capacity of insert generic evil empire here. This works as a game concept and is why even a game about military strategy and empire building can make for a fun game, see Civilization. Yet, where was the game aspect in SimCity? The following are things that arguably make this a game. You have to balance a budget, you have to get resources, as in money, to build more things to produce more resources, and you have to get a very high population. But there is no ending to SimCity unless you go bankrupt or close out the game. In the modern day, especially with the cultural phenomenon that is Minecraft, such a concept is far from foreign. I argue that Minecraft Beta 1.7.3 is the feature-complete version of the game because this is the last version of the game that didn't have a tacked-on ending. Technically, the end does bring an ending to the game, but the game doesn't stop. That is because there is no goal to Minecraft. Unlike Final Fantasy VII, the entire gameplay loop isn't shaped around the objective of killing Sephiroth. Arguably, even Alpha 1.2.6 is as much of a feature-complete version of the game because while things like beds and wolves are missing, the gameplay loop is the same. The same loop is virtually unchanged from Alpha 1.2.6 and onward. The sandwich is complete, but the extra sauces like the additional biomes, dimensions, and bosses are all just the additional options you can add to your sandwich. But this is all very similar to SimCity. SimCity's main objective, if you will, does come down to the resources you have. In a game like Minecraft, it all comes down to what resources and how much you need in order to do whatever you want in the game. If you just want to kill the dragon, then don't worry about building a house. But if you want to build a house, then you will need a shitload of resources depending on what you're trying to achieve. In other words, what I'm saying is the game is what you make of it, but you do have a lot that you can make out of it. The gameplay loop for SimCity is as follows. Build a power plant, zone industrial, residential, then commercial. After some time, build an airport to support further commercial development, build a seaport to support further industrial development, and build a stadium to, you guessed it, support further residential development. Other than don't go bankrupt, the objective in SimCity is whatever you choose to make your objective. Theoretically, with any city builder, you could have a creative mode by just hacking in extra money. In fact, this is sort of what happens with the SNES SimCity. You can trigger an integer overflow to get unlimited cash. At that point, it is a pure sandbox, just with the occasional tornado or monster attack. However, let me give an example of a certain playstyle. How I usually play Minecraft is by just building a bunch of cool shit. So if your objective is to build a big city, you just need the resources and time for it. If you want to build a cool city, that is one that is visually cool to look at, then you will need the resources and time for it. Rome wasn't built in a day, neither will your city if you so choose. There's definitely ways to min-max this game too, as just like how there's an efficient way to play any game, there are objectively efficient ways of designing cities in SimCity. I didn't first play SimCity until I was maybe like 8 or 9. I found a download of it online and initially played the Super Nintendo version of it before not understanding how emulator controls work. Yeah, that's a bit embarrassing. No matter, it was through SimCity that I discovered the Super Nintendo, even if the first time I actually got past the title screen and started a new city was with either the Windows port of the game or through DOSBox emulation. Because I still wanted to see what the game was like, I looked up a video on it, and actually this might be one of the first Let's Plays I ever watched.
Let's play SimCity, but not just a normal Let's Play of SimCity. Let's play it with infinite money, because why not?
But either way, out of all the versions I've played of SimCity, stay far away from the C64 version because this one is not good. I mean, I can't shit on it too much because it is a C64 game and is technically the original version of SimCity. But it is saying something when the unreleased prototype of SimCity for the NES is a better version of SimCity. that said, even this version is technically better than a lot of the other versions for the simple reason it has music. In MS-DOS, you get sound effects that sound like the sweet PC speaker noises of nightmares. At least this version has a bit of that Nintendo flair to it. You know how some people will feel nostalgic for Japanese city pop and they were born in like 2002? It's that same feeling I start to feel when hearing this 8-bit bossa music coming from this never-released NES ROM. But, of course, nothing compares to the magic that is SimCity on Super Nintendo. This is by far the best way of playing SimCity because it has music, it has a colorful palette, the atmosphere. Holy shit, the atmosphere of this game is fucking incredible. I'm getting ahead of myself for a moment, but a day and night cycle wasn't in SimCity until SimCity 4. This will always be my favorite part of any city, real or digital, is what this city looks like at night. Standing across a river and looking at the city on the other side is always going to be one of my favorite things to see. And would you know it, this is exactly what the title screen of this game is. But why I bring this up is because seeing the city you walked on at nighttime is cool. But what about seeing the city you walked on in other seasons? Seasons are really important. I was in Miami during the winter a little while back, and as I expected, it was very warm. This is obvious if you know a thing about Florida's weather. But this is why Miami has the reputation of always being hot and humid. This is why people visit Miami, because instead of sitting in your house wrapped up in a blanket, you can instead be sitting on Miami Beach while it's snowing in Chicago. Even though this is purely an aesthetic thing and has no impact on your city, it shocks me how there hasn't been a city builder yet that really incorporates seasons into your city's design. Yet what this achieves in SimCity is the perceived passing of time. While you are limited to only 2 save files on the Super Nintendo cartridge, you do get the ability to make multiple saves of your city on the computer version. But even though you could load up old versions of your city on the computer, you always feel the passing of time on the Super Nintendo. Combine this with the soundtrack and the nearly slow-paced nature of the game, and you get a very comfortable game. The in-game soundtrack for each stage of your city feels very similar when placed next to each other. It's like how 2010 is similar to 2011, and how 2011 is to 2012 to 2013, until you compare 2010 to 2020 and realize, hold up, 10 years just passed. The village theme feels similar to the town theme, but eventually you get to the metropolis theme, which feels similar to the capital theme, but is totally different to the village theme. And yes, I am picking the metropolis theme for a reason. I do not know anyone personally who has played this version of the game besides myself, so the only way I've ever seen the Megalopolis stage of SimCity is through YouTube. Thank God the soundtrack for this game exists on YouTube and Nintendo doesn't ever take down the soundtracks for their video games. But besides the point, the day you reach 500,000 people in a SimCity Super Nintendo city is a day to celebrate. Not only have you done something very few have achieved, but you also have the mental fortitude to sit through SNES lag. Yeah, I've tried this many times and have never gotten above even 200,000 people. For me, it feels like the game just slows down so much by the time you pass 100,000 people. At this point, it still runs fine, but by 150,000 people is just terrible. The game speed option basically does nothing, and the problem at this point is you aren't making enough money to keep going. Population keeps going up, then down, then up, then down, never actually growing, always needing another fucking nuclear power station to run your city, and you simply don't make enough. How is it that even with a 7% tax rate in a city of 150,000 people, you only make, what, 10,000 a year? What kind of tax is this? I assume it probably is an income tax, since that typically is at the federal level. So is this property tax, a sales tax? What the hell is this that somehow I can only scrape $10,000 off 150,000 people? Oh, I know, it must be some rich fuck who feels bad for us and is giving us a tiny bit of money to run the city. Either way, SimCity on the Super Nintendo is a lovely game to play at some point in your life. It requires a special situation, I'd say, to fully enjoy it. Ideally, maybe waking up early in the morning, sitting in front of a TV with the game running on it while eating some breakfast. It does sadden me to say, though, that this is not the best SimCity to experience. If you want a good city builder to build a city right now, you won't find it in SimCity, whereas if you want a good platformer or a good RPG, there's still options from the Super Nintendo library that hold up today. The enjoyment of SimCity, however, I will chalk up to nostalgia, even if I didn't grow up with the Super Nintendo. But before moving on to SimCity 2000, I think it is important to at least emphasize the historical importance of SimCity. From what I can tell, there were a couple games before SimCity that attempted to be about building cities. Wikipedia lists off 6 city builder games that predate SimCity. The Sumerian game, the Sumer game, and Hammurabi appear to be very similar as they are merely text-based games. Then there's Santa Paravia and Fiumaccio, which honestly feels a lot more like Oregon Trail or a board game than SimCity. Then there's Yellow River Kingdom and, ASCII game. Yeah, no. And dear God, there's Utopia. Well, if you ever wanted a port of SimCity onto the Intellivision, this is what it would look like. That now brings us to SimCity. I don't think I need to explain why SimCity is so important after showing what predated it. SimCity defined what the city building game should look like and how it should play. Building a city shouldn't be about reading text or taking turns in a board game. It should feel like you're actually designing the city you want to build. It should involve you placing down roads, power plants, police stations, and parks. It should involve you zoning where houses go, or businesses, or factories. SimCity isn't just a game about numbers, it's a game about design and consequence. Though I think later games did it much better, the groundwork for the series in this first game is definitely very clear to see. So, the next logical installment to SimCity is SimCity 2, right? Well, not quite. SimCity itself had way too many alternate versions of it made. The original came out in 1989, with the Super Nintendo version following in 1991. SimCity Enhanced is a CD-ROM version of the game with full motion video that came out a year after SimCity 2000 in 1994.
This is what happens?
You need a good shot from one of your very own 10-gigawatt lines. Maybe then you'd see the light. You bloody well get it.
There was also the confusingly titled SimCity Classic, released the same year. Interestingly, SimCity Classic has a song in it, and is a bit of a nostalgic song to me because I remember running this game on the Windows 7 XP mode VM back in the day. But still, the best SimCity experience lies on the Super Nintendo. I find SimCity 2000 very boring, but very important. This is probably the most important SimCity game in terms of its evolution, because it added in a third axis. I mean, visually, it is still just 2D sprites, so it is about as 3D as Populous, but this isometric perspective is what would become a staple of the series for both 3000 and 4.
Reticulating Splines.
Technically though, there is the above ground view, which allows you now have mountains and valleys, plus the option to do terraforming, while the below ground view lets you install water pipes and subways. Speaking of, mass transit actually is useful in this version, as previously what Rails did in SimCity was connect the city, but erase all possible traffic since there were no longer any roads. That, simply put, isn't realistic, so in this version, roads are still necessary, but rails and subway lines have their purpose. There were more options for power plants, more options for parks, the introduction of density-based zoning, but all blocks had to still be manually connected with power lines over the road. SimCity 3000 is only a couple years away, this won't be necessary soon. But that is in essence the type of stuff that was added in SimCity 2000. From this point onward, honestly, the most substantial thing that will happen to the franchise is SimCity 4's region play, as this game is fundamentally the same as SimCity 3000 and 4. But that is sort of a lie. Technically, SimCity 2000 did something pretty fucking cool. Now granted, this was restricted to a special version of the game that only worked on Windows 95 and 98, but SimCity 2000 Network Edition is a multiplayer SimCity game played over TCP IP. Yeah, you heard me, there's a multiplayer SimCity game from 1996. It is worth talking about this version, as it changes gameplay quite a bit. So, effectively, you aren't a mayor, but instead someone in charge of a district in the city. You buy land to build on and have the ability to make deals with other players. I've never actually played this with anyone. I mean, try asking someone to work out some random software to get a semi-obscure 90s game to work. But the concept does seem like it could be fun. And that is something to mention, this version is very rare and needs a lot of stuff to get it working on a modern system. Unlike Transport Tycoon, it's not like an open SC2K has been made. And I lie again, as apparently there was an attempt to give SimCity 2000 the OpenTTD treatment, but it kinda got butchered because it used copyrighted assets. Well, anyway, Ideally, I'd want a remake of SimCity 4 with the support of multi-core 64-bit processors, but if SimCity 2000 could get a source port with further multiplayer support, man, I'd play that. Right now on GOG, you can buy SimCity 2000 for $6. Yeah, you can't do that with SimCity. For some reason, that isn't available on GOG. But 2000 is for $6, 3000 for $10, and 4 for $20. My recommendation is to actually play SimCity 2000. Yeah, I said it was boring to play, but because I've gotten everything I wanted out of this game. I do think it is worth playing though, because it is a very well made game that does a lot for the SimCity series. Honestly, if the Super Nintendo version of SimCity didn't exist, I'd say this should be as old as you go when it comes to the series. But, even so, there's a huge problem. You really don't even need to play SimCity 2000 because a better version exists. SimCity 3000 exists and is really fucking good. On-disk DRM is a crime against humanity. So apparently, back in some Windows 8 update, Microsoft removed a couple files that were used as part of the CD-DVD-ROM driver. Now this stuff still works if your computer even has a disk drive in it, but it is understandable for a software developer like Microsoft to slim down their OS from time to time. Hell, I'm surprised Windows 10 even had a 32-bit version. Thank God Windows 11 moved on from that shit, and no, I will not upgrade. But this little change has made it where any game using Securom DRM or Safe Disk will simply lose it. I own fucking physical copies of old ass PC games, and you're really gonna tell me this fucking CD I've put in my computer can't boot SimCity anymore? Again, it isn't just SimCity 4, it isn't just SimCity 3000, it isn't just any fucking game by EA, it is every game that used this shitty copy protection. Back in 1999, people had just gotten CD drives in their computers. They were expecting by 2014 for a lot of computers to start dropping CD drives entirely, and yet I'm the sucker that still has a disk drive in the computer for two reasons. One, there'd be a hole in my computer if I took it out, and two, I keep it unplugged until I have an emergency that involves a CD. So, thank GOG there's a fucking DRM-free version of this game that is sold by GOG. Before this was released, it was a pain in the fucking ass to get this game working. You want to know how you get around ancient CD DRM? You track down a cracked version of the game. Yeah. You find the pirate executable, pray it won't deploy some ransomware on your computer, and hope the game boots with sound. So, I'm going to say it right now. Fuck every game publisher who treats their customers like criminals. I've purchased these games multiple fucking times because I love these games and I want to play them, and yet I have to reach around Albuquerque to get to my ass when it comes to wanting to play this. With that said, I will buy a vinyl record of this game's OST if given the chance. Honestly, probably the highest praise I could ever give a game, because usually if I love a game enough, I'll buy the soundtrack and attempt to support even the composer of the soundtrack. So, EA, Jerry Martin, whoever it is that is in charge of the SimCity 3000 soundtrack, please release a high quality version of the soundtrack on vinyl. Sim Broadway is one of the greatest songs to ever come from the SimCity and Sims franchises. Actually, fuck, I'd get the entire Sims 1 OST on vinyl. Anyway, I love this song. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to do with nostalgia, but this fucking embodies SimCity. This captures the romanticized magic of a city, people going anywhere they can at all hours of the day, anything that is everything happening. And it isn't chaos, it's simply the organism of a city being alive. Oh, and it's jazz. I mean, the location I immediately think of when it comes to jazz is New York. So for as much as I hate the fact this came on a copy-protected CD, it is the technology of a CD that allows this game to have such an amazing soundtrack. You're not going to get this from any MIDI tracking technology back in the day. Of course, other highlights on the soundtrack include Magic City, Nightlife, New Terrain, and Power Grid. This soundtrack definitely doesn't stick to one genre, as quite a few of these songs start off very ambient. But here's the thing, that's actually perfect when it comes to this game. A little bit of production advice. With my videos, I am very careful in how I mix the music. In fact, unless I know something in the video requires music, I usually add in music at the end of production. Insert fourth wall breaking clip right here. But this is because you don't want music to be too overpowering, and that is the same here in SimCity 3000. So, SimCity 3000, it is SimCity 2000 but with better graphics and an incredible soundtrack. Seriously, I mean the biggest change I'd say is this news ticker at the bottom. On occasion you'll get people petitioning for new ordinances, building a new reward building, or even a neighbor deal offered. You see, SimCity 2000 had neighboring cities in it, but they practically did nothing for the city. There was also the newspaper that would pop up when something happened, such as a new infrastructure thing that got invented. All this carries over into SimCity 3000, but there is definitely more of a focus on the city and far fewer interruptions to the gameplay. And actually, that might be the biggest improvement. Now granted, I have reasons why SimCity 4 is better, and we'll get there, but on a pure experience level, everything in SimCity 3000 feels comfortable. SimCity 2000 is a game you can progress very quickly in. A year literally passes in a couple seconds, while in SimCity 3000 it is much further from the case. So on one hand, just like previous versions of the game, you get payouts from your yearly budget at the end of the year. But in SimCity 2000, you get this money very quickly, while in SimCity 3000 it does take a minute to get just a couple thousand. Kinda like SimCity for the Super Nintendo. But unlike the Super Nintendo, I haven't had problems where this game slows down because of the population getting too big. Of course, we're talking about running SimCity 3000 on a computer that's about 20 years newer than any computer of respect for versus a Super Nintendo game. But I think it is important to note this particular element of quality of life when considering playing the game in 2022. So because I can keep going in circles with this game in particular, let me just say this is an entry in the franchise that is absolutely worth playing. This was the first SimCity I played, it isn't entirely the one I'm the most nostalgic for, but I think it is a fantastic game overall. There is one last story I must tell before moving on to SimCity 4. This is MAGNASANTI. Perhaps the most important city to ever be made in SimCity 3000, MAGNASANTI is terrifying. It is a city of 6 million people packed into a single city tile. It is the most efficient city that can be made in SimCity 3000 as it was designed to push the limits of the simulation. Anything beyond MAGNASANTI is beyond SimCity 3000. Now in reality, this is also terrifying because someone managed to figure out the most dystopian creation that could be made out of SimCity 3000 that rivals even the Kowloon walled city. The person responsible for this had several different plans before landing on MAGNASANTI, of which they were insane enough to build. Yes, MAGNASANTI was the product of many tests with the simulation that took multiple months to complete. And sure enough, I have yet to find anything that surpasses it. So on one hand, I am faced with the dystopian city, while on the other, I am fucking impressed with this person's commitment to creating this horror. I tell this story because earlier on I talked about needing to make what you want out of the game. This is not only a prime example of that, but is also a demonstration that reaches the furthest point of min-maxing. This is truly beyond what Maxis envisioned in the 90s when creating this game, but it is all within what the tools allowed. So, I think I like SimCity 4. Back when I was 7, I got a computer. I was probably a bit too young to have one, but I think I turned out well, and nowadays 3-year-olds watch YouTube on their iPads, so I guess it's not a big deal. Anyway, one of the first PC games I got was SimCity 4. I think it was on the back of this Command & Conquer jewel case that I first saw an ad for SimCity 4, and was immediately intrigued. I was interested in what SimCity 4 would be like compared to SimCity 3000, and of course, being 7, the very first city I built went bankrupt. But over time, and after I stopped using the money tree mod, I got better. Much, much better. Pretty much everything you'll see from this point onward has been modded. That is because this was the very first game I modded. Yeah, in 2010 or so, the first mod I ever used for a game was the network add-on mod. Does anyone from the SimCity 4 community remember when you had to download each module of the NAM mod individually? There was Network Add-on, Rural Highway, and Network Widening, just to name a few. There's also one of the weird things with SimCity 4 mods. Some of them you just drop into the plugins folder, while others you had to run installers. At almost any given point, my installation of SimCity 4 would have been around 4 gigabytes of mods. Simtropolis looked like this when I first discovered it. SimCity 4 Devotion looked like this. The Simpeg Plex hadn't died yet, and I'm pretty sure a few other fan sites are still around. To say the least, there's two games that I'd say I know way too much obscure bullshit about. The first one is Minecraft, which I talked about at length previously, and the second one is SimCity 4. So the reason I've said all this is because I don't know of another way of explaining how important of a game this was to me. Like, no joke, some of the first things I watched on YouTube were of SimCity 4. Hell, I was curious enough to wonder what is a fraps, and eventually bought a license for Bandicam. Yeah, no more Bandicam.com watermarks at the top of my 10-minute videos. I think for as much as I love filmmaking, it was this game that got me curious about digital video production. I distinctly remember making a couple videos back in 2011, and guess what? They were of SimCity 4 gameplay. I never uploaded them anywhere on the internet, and unfortunately, they may be on some dead hard drive somewhere. However, I can say with confidence a video of SimCity 4 made in Windows Movie Maker in 2011 led me to making an hour-long video on Minecraft in 2021. I cannot begin to properly critique this game. I could simply say, just mod it, just install NAM and call it a day, but even that doesn't fully address every flaw of this game. For instance, this game has a tendency to lock up or crash if you don't update it properly and apply a 4GB RAM patch. The vanilla road systems are kind of crap. One-way roads cannot cross city borders, neither can streets, but roads, avenues, and highways can. There's ways of manipulating the RCI demand to almost create demand out of nowhere, while there are times it seems absolutely nothing wants to build. Power plants still wear out and have to be replaced all the time. There's a bug where airports just invent new forms of crime that the police are incapable of preventing, and this region system honestly is very flawed looking back at it today. For instance, demand isn't region-wide, it actually is based on weird-ass border updating, so in a way, you almost have to play Conway's Game of Life by loading each city individually to properly update demand. In addition, you cannot do neighbor deals with any city in the region, only the ones that directly border you, even if you've set up an intricate system to just funnel the entire region's trash into a city of incinerators. And with that said, these incinerators are right next to this residential neighborhood on the other side of the city limits, but because pollution, or really any stat, doesn't carry over to affect nearby locations in neighboring cities, it's somehow logically consistent in the game to have high wealth housing next to a city with 1,000 times worse air pollution than Beijing. And yet, I still like this game. I don't play it a lot, in fact I do find myself getting a bit bored after playing it long enough, but every now and again I'll come back to put maybe 6 or so hours into it. You gotta remember, this was the best city builder on the market from the time it came out to at least 10 years after it came out. Granted, new city builders were created, but they never properly replaced SimCity 4. SimCity 4 was the definitive upgrade to SimCity 3000, even if the region system is one of its biggest criticisms. It greatly improved graphics, but you also gotta think it is making multiple cities work together for not just the first time, but also one of the only times across the city builder genre as a whole. Future city builders would dabble with this a bit, notably Cities XL when it was an MMO. You could trade resources with other players, and later games trade resources with your own cities. SimCity 2013 would also try this same concept, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. To my knowledge, there isn't another city builder that has done this region system and done it better, which is unfortunate. If I could remaster SimCity 4, I would keep almost everything the same, even the fact it isn't 3D like newer games, but greatly improve the underlying engine. For one, make it run better on multiple processor cores and run better on newer graphics cards, but also make bigger city tiles, the ability to merge and split tiles, and perhaps the option to run cities in the background. In a way, I do what The Sims 3 did, where it allowed for neighbors in your game to actually age up and have children given enough time. Likewise, have it where you could let your cities run in the background, getting more money and more people moving in while you work on other cities. SimCity 2013 may have gotten the closest to this happening, but we'll get there. Trust me, I have a few things to say about SimCity 2013. Until then, I gotta praise the SimCity 4 soundtrack. For me, this is very nostalgic because I listened to this for hours on end. No joke, if you played a song from this game, there's a good chance I could hum along to the whole thing. Even so, there isn't that many tracks that stand out to me given how many songs there are in the game. Yeah, they actually put a lot of music into this game, far more than SimCity 3000 had. Hell, SimCity 4 actually installed off 2 CDs, a third one with the Rush Hour expansion, or just 2 CDs if you settled on the deluxe version. Fuck, look at this. I played my weird Amazon UK version of SimCity 4 so much, the second disc is cracked. Yeah, this is from how many times I put it in my laptop's CD drive. To make it simple, the songs I give a shit about with this game are as follows. Rush Hour, The New Hood, Without Form, Street Sweeper, Zone System, Urban Underground, Gritty City, Electricity, and Night Owl. And remember, for me, this whole soundtrack is nostalgic. With that said, I still think SimCity 3000 really did have bigger moments in its soundtrack compared to SimCity 4. But now I do want to praise this region mode a bit. Look, it is incredible trying to understand the scale of a place like New York or Tokyo. I have yet to go to Tokyo, but in New York, it is so cool how anywhere you look, you'll see city. You can stand on the East River, but for as far as you look up the river, down the river, across the river, and behind you, you'll only see urban development. Miami, you'll have miles upon miles of suburban development and a very cool skyline. But to me, New York simply hits different because it does feel like a new habitat. It lives up to its name of the concrete jungle. SimCity 4 allows you to do this. Yeah, the city tiles are like 16 square kilometers at best, but if you complete several cities all next to each other, holy shit, you actually end up with a region view that looks like New York. I don't know where this region file is anymore, but I actually filled up a region once in this game. Yeah, I've done that before, and it was the coolest thing I've ever done in this game. Filling up a region in SimCity 4 is a lot like getting 500,000 people on the Super Nintendo. There's a few who have done it compared to everyone else who have played the game, and it's very satisfying once you have done it. Ultimately though, this is perhaps the biggest thing that will split the audience. If you want a city builder that is the best on the market, unfortunately, I cannot recommend SimCity 4. It has been outpaced in recent years, but that is still quite the achievement. Now, maybe it's because EA didn't really give two shits about SimCity after the Rush Hour expansion dropped, but the fact that plenty of people still played this well after 10 years it came out does speak volumes to this game's design. SimCity 4 is where SimCity as a series peaked. It definitely could have gone further, but out of the mainline series, this is where things start to go downhill. So I'll describe it as this. If you want an old school SimCity game with the most features and the ability to create aesthetically pleasing cities, then SimCity 4 Deluxe is without a doubt the game to play. Do not get SimCity 4 No Rush Hour because this is missing half of the features that made this game decent. SimCity 4 Deluxe has the most support for all the mods and especially the network add-on mod. To make aesthetically pleasing cities in this game, you will need to browse the Stex or Lex file exchanges for an hour or so, but you won't regret it. If you want a game where you just focus on your city and nowhere else, then SimCity 3000 Unlimited is the game to play. It doesn't feel as convoluted as SimCity 4 sometimes gets, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Ultimately, both games will remain very nostalgic for me, but it is SimCity 4 that I spent the most time on. It is the SimCity that I remember the most fondly, and it is the SimCity that I view as the final SimCity. So there's SimCity 4. In my mind, this was the final SimCity game. There was never a SimCity 5, there were only 4 mainline titles, but in reality, that is willful ignorance. As an example, there were a few mobile versions created, including a Nintendo DS version, but I don't count these as mainline titles. Notice how I didn't spend any time on the SimCity card game, or SimCity 64, or the numerous console versions of SimCity 2000. However, there was, unfortunately, 2 more versions of SimCity released on PC. Let's begin with SimCity Societies. Societies is not a SimCity game. It is a game where you balance population, classes, and a leisure and work score in order to create a certain style of city. This might have been a cool idea, except all this can be summed up with there is no zone system. Yes, the game that invented the fucking RCI chart ditched the RCI zoning system. Oh, and on top of that, Societies wasn't developed by Maxis. I think at this time, Maxis was busy working on The Sims 2 and Spore, yet EA still wanted a new SimCity 4 years after SimCity 4. The only thing I can say that is good about Societies is the music. There's a few tracks that are pretty cool, but this is not SimCity. Imagine taking Legend of Zelda and making it a game not set in Hyrule, not at all featuring Link or Zelda, and instead of going on an adventure, you're actually strategizing some military invasion. While yes, Europa Universalis and Hearts of Iron have been successful game series, this is not what anyone wants from a Zelda game. SimCity Societies decided to take SimCity, remove the region system, remove like half of the other systems this series developed, and make the game more similar to Tropico than SimCity. So no, this is not a game worth your time. The only thing more embarrassing is that I made my Origin account just for this game before it was even called Origin. After that, the next significant thing to maybe happen was Spore, then The Sims 3. And notably, Maxis was not initially a developer on The Sims 3. Oh, they changed that with an update, but my physical copies of The Sims 3 still show only EA. So, was Maxis dead? Let's find out. Let me be calm and tell you the story of SimCity 2013. Fuck that. This is a game I spent around $80 on at launch, and it was a game I looked forward to for many years. Now, let me put this in context. I was about 10 when this game came out. I really got into SimCity 4 within the past 3 years, and when I played SimCity Societies, I pretty much only played it because I owned it, and technically it was a 3D SimCity. So, what do you get when a child spends the $80 they got for Christmas on a game that sucks ass? Years of disappointment. I learned real fucking quick every problem with AAA games. You wanna know why I emulate the Super Nintendo to play some old games? Why I still buy old DOS games on GOG? Why I will buy the soundtracks to indie games I love? It's because these games are good. At the time, SimCity 2013 showed everything wrong with AAA games. Mandatory DRM. Holy fucking shit. SimCity 2013 is fucking notorious for their launch day DRM, and with that said, their servers. Always online connection to EA's dogshit servers. The whole damn game being dependent on some servers thousands of miles away instead of your own damn PC. Why the fuck is my single player city on some fucking server? I'm pretty sure a city isn't going to be more than a few megabytes, and back in 2013, most computers had at least 250 gigabytes of space. So if you were installing SimCity 2013, you had hard drive space for your cities. And really, I cannot get past the fucking servers on launch day. Why the fuck did I have to sit in a fucking queue for 20 minutes just to launch the damn game and get into my single player city? I could fill an entire city tile in SimCity 4 before I get to my city that I don't even own a fucking copy of. If that save file isn't on your hard drive, that isn't your save file. It's all about possession. $80 for a service, $60 for a game that was a fucking disappointment, and $20 for jack shit. Oh, launch day bonuses. How about you spend that time getting your damn service to work on launch? But of course, I will retroactively take responsibility for being the fool who paid for launch day DLC. Look, I was 10. I don't do that now. I rarely pre-order anything, and even when it comes to most extra shit for a game, I'm sometimes comparing things off spreadsheets. I learned my lesson, but I will still be bitter about the then current state of the industry when things have hardly changed. Imagine buying a copy of fucking, I don't know, Roller Coaster Tycoon, and before being able to open the park, you get a message saying you've disconnected from some servers. Why the fuck should that matter? Well, I can tell you why. EA hates their customers. Oh, the amount of shit I can bring up about EA, the amount of utter bullshit this company has done and gotten away with. For me, this single company became a symbol of everything wrong with gaming for many years. Right now, I can only make an exception for Activision Blizzard because of the heinous shit that went on in their offices. Oh, but trust me, they were not far behind EA before all that came out. Well, because I love breaking the immersion of my videos, what does make Activision Blizzard even more peculiar is how Microsoft now owns them, or at least is in the process of buying them. Yeah, I don't know. Really odd how in 2021 some allegations came out and now Activision Blizzard is moving swiftly to join our overlords at Microsoft Corporation. I mean, who knows? If Microsoft decides tomorrow they want to own EA, maybe soon I'll just change my whole position and say Microsoft is the symbol of everything wrong with gaming since they own the whole damn market. SimCity 2013 saw the resurrection of the Maxis brand and its subsequent death. After SimCity 4 and the success of The Sims and The Sims 2, Maxis would appear one last time on Will Wright's final game, Spore. An ambitious title that also had some pretty notorious problems as well. I think I'm sensing a pattern here. Some update around the Supernatural or Seasons expansion retroactively add the Maxis brand to The Sims 3. But Maxis was back in SimCity 2013, not anyone else. It was Maxis who was making SimCity, not some random company EA decided to pull in for a quick buck. Well, guess what? SimCity 2013 was released on March 5th of 2013. On the same day, The Sims 3 University Life came out. Yep, two fairly big releases for EA, one being a reboot of one of the most important video games of all time, and another being another paycheck signed in Simlish. Take a guess which one actually worked. So, get this. After EA fucks up the SimCity 2013 launch, after EA takes a whole damn week to get the server situation under control, after EA eventually does an about-face and says the game could have offline single player, and after EA attempts to push out an expansion pack, guess what? Maxis is shut down, and it remains are given to EA Mobile and The Sims 4. So, long and short, Maxis' only surviving legacy is the cash cow and billions it made for EA. The only thing to happen to SimCity after SimCity 2013 was a mobile game. Yeah, no shit, this sucks. So, where does that leave us with a game I haven't even described yet? Alright, let me give you 3 things to know about the gameplay of SimCity 2013. 1. It is SimCity, but with a tacked-on trading and specialization system. Honestly, this is only cool for the first time you try it. It is different, which is fine, but all of this begins to almost take priority over city design. 2. It is SimCity, as in the cities are about as big as the ones in the first game, and about as isolated as the first game. Sure, you got regions, but a big city tile in SimCity 4 had far more connectivity to other cities, was much bigger than the tiles you get in SimCity 2013, and at least on the region map, it does look like you have cities that are actually connected to each other. Yeah, this is the biggest problem I have with the actual gameplay. All this green space between cities, it just isn't how cities look in real life. 3. It is arguably a better SimCity game than SimCity Societies, but it isn't what SimCity as a series should have been. When I was a little kid, the appeal to SimCity for me was the idea of creating my own reality. I could take a game that was older than me, but imagine something more detailed than was actually on screen. The game let me do whatever I wanted in ways beyond what LEGO could. I would build little prisms out of LEGO and call them skyscrapers, and then say I built a city. What the digital world, made of a few hundred megabytes on my computer's hard drive, allowed me to do was not be constrained by the cost and physical limitations of something like LEGO, and instead envision a place that doesn't exist. A place that feels like it could be real, but it couldn't be because it was just bytes on a laptop. This was what appealed to me about Minecraft, but the difference was that SimCity 3000 existed almost a decade before Minecraft. The Sim brand was one that excited me, and it goes beyond SimCity. Finding a game like SimCity was only the beginning because Maxis made plenty of games that were in a similar vein to SimCity. SimEarth directly followed SimCity, and this time it focused on a geological scale. SimAnt focused on a much smaller scale, zooming in onto the blades of grass or cracks between the bathroom tiles. SimTower was literally a vertical empire, and even though it was technically created outside of Maxis by Japanese developer Utopia, it still followed the Maxis Sim formula and really ideology. Software toys, a name given by Maxis to many of their products, but that was exactly what made these simulations so appealing. You begin playing with them, then you start to wonder different things about how they work, then you try taking them apart and finding what works about them. This was what made the memories I have of laying on a sofa and planning out the next district in my city. It was all imagination and figuring out how to best make a city with the tools given by the game. And while arguably SimCity 2013 may have that, I do not feel this game in any way achieves more or advances the series in any way beyond a modded copy of SimCity 4. Thus, in my opinion, in the most professional way I can say possible, SimCity 2013 sucks dick. But here's the surprising thing. Though SimCity 2013 pretty much killed the series, SimCity 4 is still a game that is actively played. Except, I'm not going to elaborate on that just yet. Coming soon, an addendum, The Eternal Life of SimCity 4. So, where does that leave the city builder genre? In 2013, there was one other city builder called Cities XL. This game has a bit of a complex history, but long story short, for some reason, it kept getting a near-annual re-release that barely added anything. I've played these versions, I can attest to this. So with one series thoroughly mediocre and another that was pulled from its grave and promptly shot, that leaves us with another hole in the market. Then, exactly 2 years and 5 days after SimCity 2013's launch, I'm sitting at my desk before heading off to school and I'm about to pay $30 for Cities Skylines. In all honesty, I cannot say enough about the nearly 2,000 hours I've put into Cities Skylines. I have cities I've played for over a year on this game. I have shitloads of mods on this game. In fact, my computer has 64 gigs of RAM for only two things, running After Effects and running Cities Skylines modded. This game, vanilla, is already leagues better than SimCity 2013. For one, your cities can be expanded. You buy land and build more city to buy more land. There's no region system, which sort of sucks, but it's made up by the district system and the fact that you can truly build some massive cities in this game. But there are mods. Modding Cities Skylines is highly recommended because you get so much more out of the game with mods. Not only can you have more than 9 tiles for your city, you can build your whole city across the entire map. And yeah, you'll have some performance issues after some time, but if you have a decent computer and don't mod too much, then this feature alone won't ruin your experience. Oh, but what if you want to, I don't know, have more roads, have more trees, have more props, have the ability to move literally anything, have improved rails and metros, the ability to build your own airports, control flight paths and shipping lanes, and even add or remove outside connections. There's a mod for that. I built an entire fucking city on an island that was completely dependent on port connections. This island has a bunch of expressways on it with practically several different cities on it as well. In Cities Skylines, I built an island city-state with hundreds of thousands of people on it. You were not getting this in SimCity 2013. Or, and hopefully I still have the footage of it, what about trying to build a city using only Japanese assets? Yeah, by default, City Skylines feels very European because Colossal Order is a Finnish company after all. But there's mods out there that change the entire look of your cities. There's fucking mods for this game that let you change your default highways to not only be thinner, but also somewhat resemble Tokyo's expressways. There's Steam groups and mod collections dedicated to whatever style of city you want. I've seen German, I've seen Japanese, I've seen American, I've seen almost anything being done with this game. And yes, the biggest problem with this game is, no doubt, the traffic. This is easily the dumbest problem with City Skylines because traffic is mind-numbingly stupid. If you drive on the Belt Parkway, all lanes are going to be used. Why? Because why the hell would you sit in a single lane that has all the traffic in it? But City Skylines? Well, that's just the exit lane for the exit almost 8 exits away. So because of that, I want to make it clear that this game is not going to be enjoyable in vanilla, mostly because traffic suffocates your cities. Ambulances literally get stuck in traffic, resulting in dead bodies, where hearses get stuck in traffic, resulting in hundreds of high-rises being abandoned and your city's population getting snapped in half. But mods can somewhat fix this. That is, if you're ready to get into the science of how the traffic simulation of this game works, then playing this game modded will be a blast. But I do need to say one thing. Every city you've seen so far has been modded, alright? Every single city you've seen footage of in this game has been built by me in a very similar way though. I have not zoned a single building in this game for years until I tried to get footage of vanilla for this video. Even then, I kept my mods but got rid of my custom buildings. In any one of my normal cities, I place every single building by hand. Every house, every shop, every factory. There's mods that let you have this much control over your cities, and it is beautiful. For the first and only time in any city builder game, have I had this much control over the crafting of my masterpieces. I play with unlimited money with all buildings unlocked, and given about a year, I have made these cities. Oh, hold up. That pseudo-Japanese city, yeah, I didn't even finish that, and it took me a year to do all that. And that island city-state's, frankly, my greatest accomplishment so far. I started that before entering university, and from time to time, I go back to it. So, the legacy of SimCity is this. What you're looking at is the legacy of SimCity. There's nothing left of this franchise for what I'm concerned with. Instead, City Skylines is the current definition of what a city builder should be. To me, this is the definitive city builder, and that scares me. City Skylines is not a perfect game, really at all. There's too much DLC, and frankly, a lot of this DLC is a bunch of reskins. It tends to reskin the district system into different playable things. For instance, the parks and park life are made using the district tool that overlays a district with the pre-existing marked districts. Kinda cool actually, because you can just say somewhere is a park. Well, it just so happens this same park district cannot overlap with industrial districts in the industries expansion or university campuses in the campus expansion. That's because these are basically the same fucking things, and that bothers me. My biggest problem I have with The Sims as a franchise is how much bloat there is with its additional content. The first Sims had only 7 expansions, while The Sims 2 had about 8 expansions and 10 stuff packs. Ugh. Stuff. That's all this shit is. Stuff. Oh, it gets better, because The Sims 3 had both expansion packs, stuff packs, and an item store. Yeah, this store used a digital SimPoint currency that you got with real money to download the equivalent of mods. Yeah, that's pretty bullshit. And then there's The Sims 4, which doesn't really have this store feature, but it actually kinda does, because there's too much fucking DLC for this game. City Skylines? Well, it's a Paradox game. Yep. That means this game has about as much shit as Europa Universalis 4. Like, no joke, if you get this game, you're going to need a couple expansion packs, if only for most of the mods to work. My fear is that, while a few improvements made with every expansion are added to the game via updates, I start to wonder how much of this is just a lazy cash grab, a reskin of an old feature, or even something being withheld from the main game. I have this exact concern with The Sims 4. As for that game, I feel that the base game is very anemic, especially when it was first launched. While I do think City Skylines can work just fine without all the expansions, it does make me concerned for what the future holds. I am fucking terrified of a City Skylines 2. I've wanted what would amount to an engine update to City Skylines, basically make all the current shit still work, but let me have a better optimized game engine, improved AI, maybe some actual core features added to the game to make it more capable. But a side of me does fear that if a City Skylines 2 is released, it won't be good. With how little time I already have to spare on games I want to play for myself, I don't know if I would want to put time into a new Cities Skylines only for it to be a disappointment. But either way, some of my fondest memories in games will be those involving the meticulous construction of my cities in Cities Skylines. Really, it is Cities Skylines that successfully pushed the city builder genre beyond what it was left at in SimCity 4. At this point, I'm not having to imagine a city of mine being more detailed than the pixels on screen because I'm able to create my city down to the very meter by which trees are planted, or the elevation of the roads themselves. At this point, who knows where city building games will go. Maybe a Cities Skylines 2 will be released and blow away every expectation set by Cities Skylines. Or, perhaps like SimCity 2013, it will be a disappointing answer to nearly a decade of hype. Or perhaps another city builder will come along and do everything better. I've kept my eye open for any promising candidates, but none I have found come close. For me, I will always recall how I kept retrying the game before understanding it, after which I figured out what I needed to do to get what I wanted out of the game. Finding the most efficient way of designing a highly populated city, or designing a city that doesn't exist. Coming up with the maps of a city, state, or country that couldn't exist anywhere on Earth. It was because of childhood curiosity that I tried out numerous designs in these games. Curiosity evolved from the novice understanding of the game's systems into mastering them and making these systems your tools for expression and design. Maybe a new game will come out that will be someone else's nostalgic city builder. A game that will make someone want to wake up early in the morning, sit in front of a screen while eating some breakfast, and work towards the lofty achievements of a megalopolis.